I know how
Well,
you feel,
we're really
Sarah.
looking forward to it. Hugh, you're going to be fine. And after it's all over, you'll want to do it all over again.
But
In Zanzibar.
the question is, will any of you want me to do it all over again?
I know we will. I know. Anyway, Sarah, welcome.
Thank you.
Would you mind introducing yourself?
No. So my name's Sarah Waters. I am a psychotherapist and a DDP practitioner, which is quite a mouthful. It stands for Dyadic Developmental Practice. It's an attachment-focused family therapy was devised by an American psychologist, particularly to work with traumatized children. So it's so I spent half of my working life, I'm self-employed, luckily. So I spent half of my time working with adults in a mainly long-term psychotherapy. The vast majority of them have suffered childhood trauma, abuse and neglect, and are having to deal with the devastating consequences of that. And then the other half of my time I work, it's mainly with parents, adoptive parents who have adopted children who have been taken away from their birth parents, and they're traumatized, and they're having to try and deal with the difficult behaviour that can sometimes bring. So I'm sort of in quite a unique position, really. I get to sort of see how, you know, trauma and abuse and neglect sort of affects very young children and as they're sort of growing up. And then also I work with it in adults. So it's it's heartbreaking, really, to see how difficult it actually is to recover from it fully without a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of heartbreak, and a lot of money, which often a lot of people don't have. I'm a front face member of the Heart Group, which is a health advisory and recovery team. I would imagine most people on here would have heard of them. And I'm also on the steering group of an organisation called Therapists for Medical Freedom. I've been very vocal over the last sort of 2+ years, particularly around the harms that I feel are being done to children. That's where my heart lies. I don't think my heart's big enough to sort of be able to fill it with, I mean, the, you know, older people as well. Obviously it's affected all of us, hasn't it? But it's children and young people that I'm particularly outraged about, and I've been very vocal, and I've written quite a lot of articles about the harms that have been done. I'm very active in pushing back. I actually live in Penzance in Cornwall, which is in southwest of England. It's a very beautiful place. It's quite a hotbed of activism down here. So I've been very active in pushing back against the local council and the schools. I write letters to the newspapers all the time. So yeah, I've been very active about the harms that I feel have been done. I'm going to stop talking now and put my PowerPoint up. So I do share screen. Oh, actually, you're just going to have to give me a minute because I didn't know I was starting. I haven't got my PowerPoint up on my main screen. Let me just do that.
Sorry. Don't worry, Sarah.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Sorry, we've thrown you in at the deep end.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
But I have to say your earrings are lovely. I really like them.
Thank you. Yes. Right. Can you see that?
Not yet. So share screen. Select the document. then top left, it should say play PowerPoint or something like that.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Right, so it's up on my screen.
Yeah, so share, have you pressed share your screen, which is the middle at the bottom?
Yeah, here we go.
There we go.
Is that it?
Yes.
Right.
Hooray.
Hooray. Is it just the front page?
Yeah, how do we support young people to heal and empower them to thrive post-COVID?
Well, absolutely. What a question. Yeah, so that's the title of my presentation today. And thanks very much, Sally, for asking me to present, because ever since you have, this question has been on my mind, and it's a huge issue. I think it's probably one of the most important things that we as a global community are facing today. As far as I'm concerned, children are our future. Young people are our future. They're the most important people in my mind, and seem to have been relegated to the bottom of the pile over the last 2.5 years. So it's quite a hard question to answer. Now I'm just going to try, how do I, there we go. So it's a very hard question to answer, especially in light of this quote, which I've been very sort of influenced by, but it's by apparently Krishnamurti, the Indian spiritual teacher. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I think that sort of sums it up, really. And I basically have realised how, over the last 2.5 years, how broken and dysfunctional the systems around us really are, and especially when it comes to protecting young people's emotional health. Most of you may probably have heard of John Bowlby. He was the sort of grandfather of attachment theory. He came up with it in the 1950s, but it wasn't actually taken on board, and I would say until maybe sort of like 20-30 years ago, when it could be scientifically proven through brain scans of neglected children that just about how important the care of our young is, and actually Bowlby and all of his successors since then have taught us and helped us understand that children are actually really vulnerable. And I keep hearing this word resilience all the time, and we need to make our young people resilient, and yeah, they are resilient. But I think what Bowlby taught us was that they're vulnerable, but they've got to be resilient to survive. It's it's sort of an adaptive process to survive in adverse conditions. And that's obviously been what's been one of the most worrying things for me over the last 2.5 years, particularly around really young children, is that their brains we're born almost without a brain, maybe like 10% of our brain, 10 or 20% of our brain in the first sort of 2 years of life, it develops. And so young children that have been around masks and all of that sort of thing, I mean, it could have a sort of irreversible effect. And I see it in my private practice every week. I mean, I know it's very different. I'm thinking of 2 clients that I work with at the moment, one in her 30s and one in her 40s, who suffered severe childhood neglect and abuse. And it's very, very difficult to recover from that, because our brains and our nervous systems adapt to the environment that we're in, which is amazing because it keeps us safe and it makes us resilient, and it keeps us safe whilst we're in that environment. But then when we come out of that environment, it's very, very difficult to reverse these adaptive processes. you know, around our nervous system. And like I say, I see it in my practice, and it's just heartbreaking. I mean, the statistics are irrefutable, and children and young people have been physically and emotionally damaged over the last 2 years. There's no doubt about it. And they've not been protected by adults who seem to have been made so fearful by the governments all over the world and the mainstream media, that there just seems to have been a complete and utter lack of curiosity, reflection, and critical thinking. I mean, children have a 99.99% survival rate, and yet they have they've suffered the most. And if you go back and listen to Zenobia's presentation when she can get back online, I think she sort of goes into all of these sort of like details as to how they've been affected, just to put a bit of context around what we're talking about here. And again, you know, lovely quote from Mahatma Gandhi: if we are to reach real peace in this world, and if we are to carry on a real war against war, we shall have to begin with children. I mean, putting adults' needs over and above those of the young are just not the actions of a healthy, forward-thinking and loving society. And, you know, up until COVID hit, I was feeling, I think, obviously now very naively optimistic that we were moving as a society, definitely in the UK, you know, towards, you know, a much more, you know, loving way of bringing up our children and educating our children. And there was even, you know, there's been a massive push of trauma-informed practice over the last 10 or 15 years in the UK. A huge amount of money's been spent on it, and an army of trauma-informed professionals have been trained in child development and trauma-informed practice, and I've been part of this world. So the shock that none of these, a very, very few of these so-called trauma-informed professionals, definitely the ones at the very top who are delivering this training, the shock that that they haven't stood up for children and young people around what's happened is going to stay with me for the rest of my life. I mean, actually doing this presentation and putting it together has really made me realise how traumatizing the whole 2.5 years has been for me and for all of us, I think, in our own ways, but particularly our children. And I mean, I'm sure, you know, I know that there's many good people that work within the systems around children, in schools, you know, charities, councils, child protection. There's some very good people who care about children a lot, but where have their voices been? It's something that's baffled all of us, I know, and has been terribly and utterly disappointing. There's a COVID inquiry which is taking place in this country, in the UK, which is just starting, I think, around about now. And I mean, this will just give you an idea of how important children are deemed to be. They're not mentioned at all in the first bit of the inquiry, not mentioned at all. I mean, they might be mentioned later on, but we probably would be looking at 5 years before, you know, anything gets talked about as to the effects on children. And I mean, me, Zenobia, Hugh and others, you know, we were writing about it right from the beginning. We could have, you know, very, very easily explained what the consequences would have been of the last, you know, the guidelines over the last 2.5 years. It wasn't really rocket science, especially if you had any child development training. So I'm going to move on and I'm going to use the story of the Wizard of Oz to demonstrate what attributes I feel that the adults need to develop to help our young people heal from what has happened and to thrive in the world the very changing world that we're living in today. Because I think we cannot trust the systems around our children to keep them emotionally safe. I think that's become blatantly obvious. So using our brains, finding our courage, and doing so from the heart with love should enable us to empower our young people to become sovereign beings in their own right, who can stand up for themselves and others in the face of any further assaults upon their human rights. And I think we all know that there are going to be further challenges that us and our young people are going to have to face. To put it simply, I think that we all need to follow the yellow brick road and encourage other adults and our young to do the same. In case anybody is in denial of the harms that have been done, and I will say there are many. I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the head of the Trauma Informed Network of Cornwall and the head child psychologist of Cornwall, who called me in to sort of wrap my knuckles for sending out emails to people that I shouldn't have done in their eyes. And the head psychologist basically almost felt like, he said that the issues that I was worried about are niche and that he hasn't seen any of the difficulties that I was particularly talking about. But I unbelievably, but I do think he's probably been sat behind a screen in his bedroom for the last 2 years, not actually maybe out there working with families. And obviously these statistics are irrefutable. They're coming from very reputable sources, which I can supply people with the references if they want them. They actually are in an article that I've written. So the rates of body mass index increase has roughly doubled, with 6 to 11-year-olds experiencing a rate of change that was 2.5 times as high as the pre-pandemic rate. This is in the UK. I mean, we all know that physical health and mental health is very inextricably linked. So that's a really worrying statistic. It's not great for young people's self-esteem. And not good for their physical or their emotional health. There's been an almost 20-point drop in what is to be roughly equivalent to IQ, achieved in just 2 years for children aged 3 months to 3 years. I mean, children of this age learn things that they cannot learn later, like I was talking about earlier on. Their brains are developing and almost, they don't get completely set, but it's quite difficult to reverse things after the first sort of 3 years. So they're learning things such as early language recognition, aided by watching and interacting with people, showing their full faces, not hidden behind a mask. I mean, one of the most devastating things for me over the last 2.5 years has been seeing parents wearing face masks around their very young babies. I mean, anybody that knows anything about child development should know that this is an absolute no-no. But again, nobody seems to have spoken up about it. Babies born during the pandemic have experienced delayed development and may have fallen behind because of their mother's stress levels. Again, not a surprise. How stressful was it for all of us? And especially if you're a pregnant woman. Lockdowns, work, health worries, they're all likely to have affected these newborns' development. This was from researchers from Columbia University in the United States. And I think, I was talking to Sally about it. I think what they've done in America, they've actually lowered all the levels of very young children's development, such to try and sort of like hide this fact, which is really shocking. An additional 60,000 secondary school children in England have tipped into clinical depression, And I mean, and this is a statistic, I think, from quite a while ago. So I mean, that figure might even be higher now. But I mean, anybody that's suffered clinical depression or lived with anybody with clinical depression knows how devastating it is. And that figure to me is just absolutely heartbreaking. Lockdowns have left toddlers unable to speak or play properly, shows data from the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. Assessments showed that 1 in 5 children were not meeting standards by the age of 2.5. And the figures come amid warnings that referrals have doubled since the pandemic and therapists are unable to keep up. Children's mental health services in England are overstretched to the point where young people are waiting up to 2 years for treatment. I mean, this is after a decade in which the government in the UK made the promise that mental illness would have parity of esteem, this is their wording, with physical illness. I mean, that certainly hasn't happened. It's been the complete and utter opposite. Now that we've sort of looked at some of the, the harms that have been done, I'm now going to sort of turn to how I feel we can the best way of helping our young people. And the first thing that I think we need to do is that adults need to look after themselves first. I mean, this is the work that I do with the adoptive families that I work with. I spend a lot of time working with them first, and then we will bring in the young person later on down the line. But the adults need to be in the right state of body and mind to be able to help their children. So we need to get our brains back online so we can see the much bigger picture and start to stand up for the emotional health of our young. I mean, I appreciate I might be preaching to the converted here, and that everybody who's listening to this presentation is actually doing this. But we need to put our own life jackets on first and attend to our own well-being as a matter of priority. And this will put us in an optimum state in which to support our young people in our care, whether it's our children, whether we're a teacher, or whatever capacity we're working in with young people. It's really important that we look after ourselves to help us get out of our fight or flight reptilian brain, where critical reflection and curiosity becomes very limited. I mean, I recognised 2.5 years ago that I really needed to start looking after myself better than I already did, and I will admit I've spent most of my disposable income and a lot of my time on self-care, and so that the first one here is this is a Bruce Perry, an American psychologist, it's a theory that he's come up with, that anyone who has suffered from trauma needs to start with their bodies before their minds, using what he calls a bottom-up approach. So we need to regulate ourselves, and this relates to us first, and then also this is a very good model to work with our children and young people. We need to regulate our nervous systems in whatever way we are drawn to. I mean, for me personally, I do yoga. I get myself out in nature as much as I possibly can. I've reignited my interest in astrology, and I listen to some renowned astrologers and people that are into earth energies and consciousness and what's going on, and I listen to podcasts, which really sort of helps me get some sort of sense of what's going on in the world on that sort of a level, which I find very regulating. It might not be for everybody. Swimming in the sea, meditating, eating healthy organic food, drinking fresh filtered water. Me and all of my family go and see we have homeopathy. We go to a kinesiologist to test all our vitamin sort of levels. And so I just think we adults, we really, really need to look after ourselves, particularly now more than ever. I mean, don't think I'm a saint. I think I've also probably kept Sainsbury's in organic white Sauvignon Blanc as well. I've been enjoying that to regulate myself too. Then once we've, well, alongside regulating ourselves, I think relating is so important. I mean, we you know, being in connection with each other. Relationships are paramount in order to live well. You know, I was so shocked when the lockdown first went through the, you know, the lockdowns, and it was like, my goodness, nobody's going to be meeting up with each other and talking to each other and processing what's going on, which is my immediate reaction as to what I want to do. You know, and I was surprised that there was no support groups being set up, because in this country, the government very kindly allowed us to do this. So, I mean, it was something that I did almost immediately, set up a support group in my local community, and yeah, been very active within doing that. So I think just relating to each other, especially if you have been very scared about, you know, you have been very fearful over the last 2.5 years, getting back into conversation with people, meeting up with each other, getting off our phones. I mean, they are amazing for certain things, but trying to minimize our use of screens and really encouraging our children to do the same, and switching off from the mainstream media, I think is really important, and getting back into talking to each other, being with each other. I mean, it's good to know what's going on, but I mean, I definitely don't think sitting watching the news every night is going to do your nervous system any good at all. I mean, once we've done this, we've regulated and we're relating and to each other, then we can perhaps start to reason. It's you know, reason as to, you know, what's gone on here. What you can reason, you know, start to explore and look at the bigger picture. I think what happens when you're stuck in your reptilian brain, you know, in your fight or flight, you're in there's a very sort of small focus, which is why I think a lot of people haven't been able to sort of see the bigger picture of what's going on, which is so important now, to really look at the bigger picture of what's going on and reflect upon what are the harms that have been done to the young in light of all the evidence. And really, people need to reflect on the ethics of this. You know, we need to nurture and ground ourselves to bring our prefrontal cortex online so that this can take place. And again, this is something that we need to do for ourselves, and then also do when we are relating with our young people. I mean, we've all suffered in varying degrees. We've all been traumatized in varying degrees and in different ways. And especially when you look at, this is Bessel van der Kolk, American psychologist again, who wrote amazing book called The Body Keeps the Score. These are his 7 preconditions for trauma. And if we were going to look at these in light of what's happened, and particularly in light of what our children and young people have been through, then it really brings it home. This is our sort of modern day Kansas, the modern day tornado that we have just all been through. The lack of predictability, the lockdowns, the school shutting, shops not being open, everything changed. Everything that was predictable in our lives became unpredictable. Immobility with fear. I know Zenobia is going to be talking about this more in her presentation, but the fear campaign that we were fed from the government and from the mainstream media is just absolutely shocking. So yeah, immobilized with fear and feeling very powerless. It was definitely something that I experienced. I felt power. I wasn't so immobilized with fear over the virus, but in other ways. The loss of connection, absolutely. Young people couldn't go to school, couldn't go to meet their grandparents, were even made to feel like that would be a danger. They couldn't meet up with their friends, or go to the park. I mean, now that I think about it and talk about it, I mean, it just seems absolutely shocking. It just seems like a bad dream. And so the opposite of what young people need in which to be healthy and emotionally happy. So yeah, numbing or spacing out. I mean, a lot of this has happened. A lot of young people, I think, you know, eating disorders have gone up massively, self-harm, alcoholism, drug taking, or, you know, all these things to sort of numb us out of this sort of traumatized state. And I mean, obviously, the worst case scenario of that is completing suicide, which again, the statistics of that have gone up massively. Loss of sense of time and sequence. I mean, I don't know about you, but yeah, there was a loss of sense of time and sequence for young people. They didn't have their end of school proms to go to, or endings, and they're all the sort of endings that are so important to young people. The time and the sequence just disappeared. And all of this obviously adds up to a complete and utter loss of safety. I mean, there might have been, you know, all the physical safety, but emotional safety was gone. There was a loss of purpose, again, loss of purpose for our young people. I mean, they couldn't go out, they couldn't go to school, they couldn't meet up with their friends, they couldn't go to the park, they couldn't go and see their granny. What's the point? And I mean, I've added one of my own at the bottom here, which is a personal one for me, which is a complete and utter loss of trust and a feeling of betrayal of all the systems and the people that I felt would stand up for our young people's emotional health. So to unpack and to sort through, integrate, clear and heal from the trauma that our young have gone through, there needs to be recognition and it needs to be named. A coherent narrative supports our young people's well-being, because it isn't just what happens to us that affects us in our relationships. We're also affected by the extent to which we haven't been able to feel the full pain and then make sense of our experiences. When we don't deal with our trauma, we carry it with us. If we haven't made sense of our story, our past will still be impacting us in countless invisible ways. Trauma also carries a message of collusion and confusion with it. You know, it wasn't that bad. Keep it silent. You only got what you deserved. I mean, again, I'll go back to these two clients of mine that I currently work with, who both, you know, they're in their 30s and 40s and still, you know, they don't really, you know, the trauma that they went through as young people, I realise it's different, but it never got talked about, it never got processed, it never got owned up to, and they are left in their 30s and 40s, you know, with the constant devastating consequences of this, and feeling the, you know, the guilt is on their shoulders, and they don't, it's really, really sad to see. And they're having to deal with the terrible anxiety and depression and all the other devastating consequences that come when trauma isn't processed and talked about. And we're just not very good at doing that as a society, obviously. I mean, again, that's one of my disappointments, is I sort of felt that all this knowledge was out there. We know about all of this. When adults own up to what they've allowed to happen to young people, they, you know, they can reclaim their sense of boundaries and their own reality and their self-respect, knowing that they didn't deserve to be treated in this way, which in my experience, it amounted to abuse and neglect. I worked for a domestic abuse charity for 4 years, so I came across it firsthand in 4 years, every day of what abuse and neglect is, and what has happened to all of us over the last 2.5 years. is abuse and it is neglect. I mean, healing from trauma is a process of remembering. It's in the forgetting of what happened that trauma stays lodged in our bodies and unconscious minds, assaulting us and our young with freezing spells, brain fog, dissociation, anxiety, depression. I mean, I had a situation with my daughter yesterday. I've got a 20-year-old son, just left for university yesterday, and a 13-year-old daughter. And she has been traumatized by what's happened because she had to live with a family and a mother in particularly who was adamant that we weren't going to follow the narrative. We weren't going to wear masks. I'd never ever put one on my face. But the consequences of that is that she became very embarrassed of me and wouldn't go into a shop with me because it was very anxiety provoking. So she's been traumatized in that way, and threw it at me actually yesterday, saying, well, you know, you traumatized me over the last 2.5 years. And we processed it, we talked about it, we cried about it, we looked at it, and I think this is what needs to happen with our children and young people. And it certainly doesn't seem to be happening I mean, Hugh might be talking about this a little bit later, but again, I've just been really shocked at schools who again are meant to have a lot of trauma-informed teachers working there who should know that all of this sort of stuff, you know, what's happened needs to be processed. It needs to be talked about. But I mean, again, definitely, you know, with regards to my daughter's school, she's in secondary school here, and it just hasn't happened. There's been no processing going on at all. They've just been expected to go straight back into learning, and it almost feels like schools have got stricter actually, rather than more sort of therapeutic. And again, I'm not blaming all the, you know, the teachers. It seems to be these systems that we are in. But I would encourage any teachers that are listening to this that you don't have to put up with it. We need to talk about it. We need to push back against it. The collective trauma we have all been through, you know, I feel is this massive elephant in the room. And we need to realise that we have been psychologically manipulated. And we need to us adults need to step up into our adult ego state and out of the hypnosis to protect the young from any more emotional harm. I mean, I love the work of Matthias Desmet, and if anybody hasn't come across him or listened to any of his work over the last sort of year or so, I would highly recommend you do so. He's a Dutch professor of clinical psychology at Ghent University in Belgium and an expert in totalitarian regimes. And he goes so far as to say that the majority of people have been or still are in a state of collective mass formation or psychosis. So we need to be courageous. That's the first thing that we need to do. We need to be courageous. We mustn't turn away from any of this out of fear and disbelief. We must process our trauma first, using the methods that I talked about earlier, or obviously, you know, everybody will have their own of how they regulate themselves and look after themselves. And we've got to find the courage to talk to our young people about what they've been through, obviously in an age appropriate way. I don't talk to my 13-year-old about the bigger picture of what I believe is going on. But it's hard. It's really hard. And we need to admit if we have allowed something to happen to them that we now realise was harmful. We need to be courageous and remember the horrors that our young have been put through and declare what happened, bring it into the light of day and insist on recognition. I mean, even if there's no acknowledgement, the fact that we insist upon it does form at the basis of our healing. We mustn't allow what happened to be forgotten, and we must never allow it to happen again. I feel that we need to develop sort of more, a more sort of feminine, heart-based approach with our relationships with our young. And I'm not talking about being female, I'm talking, it's something that men can develop, and women need to maybe develop more as well. But it's just a more feminine sort of heart-based relationship. And again, my sort of utter despair and sorrow is around the fact that, I mean, I've done a lot of research into the history of childhood, and sad to say they've never actually ever really been treated with the love and the respect that I feel they deserve and need, or we need as a world in which to sort of develop the loving world that I think that we all want to live in. It starts with our children. And again, this is very much the sort of basis of like trauma-informed practice in schooling, and working with our young people. So this is something that I feel we all need to try to develop when we are having relationships with our young. I mean, it's something that's promoted for children that have been traumatized. I mean, not all children have been necessarily very traumatized by what's going on. Well, I think they all have to a certain extent, but I mean, it's not just the traumatized children. I don't think. I think this way of dealing with children is how all children need to be related and parented by, or their teachers need to adopt these methods. I mean, I was brought up in a rather chaotic but very structured forces family, and just remembering the way that I was sort of like parented, like the parent always knows best and you never get anything very much explained to you. And I just remember the difficulty that I found in being brought up in that type of environment. And luckily it was very loving, so I'm sure that made up for that, well, partly. So active listening, so really listening to our children and our young people. I think we can all have a bit of a sort of tendency to to tell young people what to do, or give them advice, or not really listen to them. So I think active listening is like a really good thing to do with children and young people. Especially I think when they're, I mean, like I said, I've got a 13-year-old daughter who's really sort of like, she's really pushing the boundaries at the moment. I mean, a lot of the time I'd sort of rather not be close to her when she's in one of her moods, and I'd rather she was away from me. And that is my sort of, I'm sort of instinctually sort of like, no, get away from me. But I know in my heart, and I know that she's proven to me that really she doesn't want to be sent away, or maybe she does want to go and sit in her bedroom for 10 minutes, but then she wants me to go up there and to talk to her about what's going on. So I think this concept of sort of having time in with our children rather than pushing them away from us or putting them away from us when they're struggling, or their behavior is not sort of quite how we would like it to be. So having time in, having special time with them. Again, I think it's difficult, especially in the teenage years, to sort of, they just want to be with their friends. They don't want to be with us adults all the time. But I still think it's really important that we make a real effort to have special time with them. Parenting with pace. I mean, it's not just parenting. This is something, again, this is a trauma sort of informed. This is rolled out in all trauma-informed training. So this army of trauma-informed professionals are taught. This is about this way of being with young people. I mean, I do have it's quite a difficult one, really, because I don't really think it's something you can teach people. It's something that you have to be. Because I think young people know if you're trying to act act accepting and empathic, whereas actually you're not really feeling it. So yeah, it's not really a strategy. None of these are sort of strategies that you can pick up and pick down. I think this is a way of being in our lives, just developing more sort of playfulness. There's definitely been a lack of playfulness, hasn't there, and fun and laughter. And so if our children are playing, if our young person is displaying difficult behavior and it's appropriate, being a bit sort of playful about it rather than it being so serious, trying to accept how they're feeling, whether you agree with it or not. I think we all really desire our feelings to be accepted. I think that's the one main thing that we can do for our young people, and also do for each other, and be curious around what's going on for them, and being curious with them, wondering with them around what's maybe going on. And I think this sort of really makes them feel loved and understood, and that you're sort of trying to spend some time and sort of like trying to understand what's going on for them. Being empathic, trying to sort of put yourself in their shoes and empathizing. Again, I'll use my daughter as an example. She's gone back, she's in school and comes back a lot of the time just really upset because she might be sort of playing up or being rude, or she's got her head on the table and she's got a detention or been told off, and really she just wants she just wants the teacher to come up and say, "Oh, Ivy, how are you? Are you all right? Are you a bit tired? Come on." And then if somebody did that, she'd get her head off the table. She'd feel emotionally connected. Somebody cared, and then she probably, I would imagine, get on with her day. And I'm not blaming all the teachers, because again, I think they are in the system where a lot of this is just not, they don't have the capacity to do it. But I think it's just so important, because I think, as you will talk about later, if our young people are stressed out or unhappy or feel that they're not being listened to, they're not going to learn, and their brains are not going to be in the right place in which to learn. And I felt like all of this knowledge was common knowledge, but obviously maybe it needs driving home a little bit more. The next one there is keeping calm whilst being assertive around our young people. That's quite a difficult one. I certainly don't manage to do that all the time. I mean, obviously this is all an ideal. I shout at my kids, I get stressed, but I mean, just aiming to try and keep calm, not arm, whilst we're trying, helping our young people with our behaviour, I think really, really helps, because then if you're calm, then that will stop them from maybe getting more emotionally dysregulated. Rewarding positive behaviour rather than focusing on negative behaviour. And all of these things are all around establishing safety, really. It's emotional safety. It's connected. And I think when our young people feel emotionally safe, and they know that they can come to us and they're going to be listened to and they're not told what to do, and we're going to try and understand what's going on for them, they're going to be much more likely to come to us in the future. And it will really strengthen our relationship with our children and our young people, whether they are in a parental role at school or any environment in which you're working with young people. And all of this, if we go back to that Bruce Perry model about the bottom down way, it's sort of all of this is sort of helping them regulate. If we can do this, then we can relate to them in a much more heart sort of centered way, which will help them and us sort of like reason and reflect around what's going on and repair if we need to. Moving on from that more sort of practical stuff, there's loads of books, by the way, loads of stuff around those sort of therapeutic parenting methods, and I've got heaps of stuff on my website as well if anybody wanted to look a bit more into therapeutic parenting, because it is quite difficult, because it's not how any of us were parented, I don't think, or very few of us. I'm going to move on now onto some other areas that I really feel is important for us to teach our children. I've been really, one of the amazing things over the last couple of years has been the emergence of some fantastic people who are writing amazing stuff and speaking, and I've been really influenced by Charles Eisenstein is one person. Again, if you haven't heard of him, I'd really recommend looking him up. I mean, this is, you know, I think we need to teach our children that we are in cooperation with, not in opposition to the intelligence of nature. I think we really need to challenge this mechanistic view of the world that this COVID era seems to be vehemently reinforcing. It's like we're being almost wanting to separate us from nature. So to challenge this mechanistic view of the world, get our kids out in nature, do as much as we can in nature. And also just, you know, young people need to take risks. We all do. It's part of being human. It's how we all grow and mature. And this sort of whole mechanistic technological control around everything to keep us safe and create certainty is not how I want to live. I think the cost of living like this is far too high. I mean, for me, it's not living at all. I think we must teach our young that uncertainty is an inherent part of being human and a necessary condition for the emergence of creativity, individuality, and connectedness. I think we need to teach them that death is a part of life, not something to run from, no matter what the cost may be. I mean, what about living? I think we've all probably heard stories about people who've been so scared, I mean, particularly old people, that they've spent maybe the last 2 years of their lives hiding away and not seeing any of their relatives, and then have maybe died, and it's like it's not living. The fear of death is I think that's what is being played on here, is everybody's so scared of dying. So I just sort of feel we need to start teaching our children more about how powerful we are, how powerful we truly are, and we are spiritual beings, and we're much more powerful than those at the top would like us to think and like us to believe. So I think if we can really start modelling like this to our young people and children, and teaching them about this sort of thing, then teaching them about the magic that's in our world, you know, a magic that can be tapped into and utilised if we are brave enough to follow the road less travelled. So the Wizard of Oz story, or is it a prophecy, is a reminder, I think, that we have to develop courage, we have to develop sound thinking, and we have to have the fire of love in our hearts to seek the truth so we can break through the illusion. And it's a nudge that we need to be careful and take action to protect and help others around us. Just as the witches in the movie thought Oscar was a great wizard, we have made assumptions that the political system and those who work within it are there for the benefit of the people and our children. But they never were, and they never will be. So it's us that needs to step up. And it's not an easy thing, I know. In a way, that this presentation is almost, you know, I've had a massive fear of public speaking and speaking out. It's been a lifelong fear and a challenge that I've been desperate to overcome, but it's been really difficult. And the last 2.5 years has really sort of pushed me into facing that fear. And I think when we know that something's right and we have love in our hearts and we are seeking the truth, then it gives us the courage to do the things that we never thought that we'd be able to do. And I also think that if we're coming from that place, we're protected. I know a lot of people are fearful of losing their jobs or being ridiculed, or and that does happen. But I think we have to have faith that if we are speaking the truth, we are protected. I mentioned Matthias Desmet earlier on, and he's been another, you know, he's been very influential to me over the last year or so. So speaking out calmly, wisely, and rationally is essential, as it leads to experiences of meaning in existence. Even if it has no effect upon the other, it will steadily elevate us within our humanity. This is a quote from his new book that he's got out. And I'm really struck by the bit where it says, even if it has no effect upon the other, it will steadily elevate us within our humanity. I think that's a really good thing to remember, that it's not so much about trying to change anybody else's mind or argue with them or make ourselves right, because I think, as we probably most people know who are listening to this, that doesn't actually work. And I think just having in our minds that if we speak out, it's not about trying to change anybody's mind. It's just the very energy and the very fact that we're speaking out will steadily elevate us within our humanity. And that's really feel where we are at. Also, by doing this, it's a fantastic way to model courage to our young people, to empower them to speak up for themselves and to be brave and to risk standing out from the crowd. I mean, even though my daughter had a go at me yesterday and about how traumatizing it was over the last couple of years, I think I've really taught her that if you don't believe in something, you don't think something's right, you don't have to do it, even though everybody else is. I mean, it's a terribly difficult thing for a young person in particular to do, and I wasn't expecting her to do it necessarily. Particularly at her age, at 13, you just want to be part of the crowd. That's all you want to be. You want to be the same as everybody else. But hopefully, as she gets older, she will realise that she doesn't have to do that. So I think we must all don our ruby slippers and, like Dorothy, realise how powerful we are and how magical the universe is. We must grow into this power and help our young people feel confident to do the same. And I love this quote by Einstein. The person who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. But the person who walks alone is likely to find himself in places no one has ever seen before. And that's really struck home to me, that quote about how we have to be courageous and stand out from the crowd, even though it feels very exposing and we feel very vulnerable and very afraid. I would really encourage everybody that that's what we need to do. And I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted people who are watching this, and that they are already doing that already. So to finalise my presentation, I'd just like to leave this on the screen. So let us not forget, let us remember, and let us lead for the children. That's made me quite emotional.
Sarah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's made us emotional. Sorry, had you finished?
Yes, I was just going to say that thank you very much, and well done, Sally, for putting all this together. I know it takes a lot of work, and I just think it's an amazing thing that you're doing. It's made me very excited, and I definitely feel it's the way forward, and I really hope that this conference ignites it into existence, and that maybe it could be a template for rolling out similar things across the world. Because I think what everybody's been talking about over the last three days, I haven't actually been able to listen to the speakers from the last 2 days, but I'm really looking forward to doing that. I feel very honoured to be part of it. And thank you.
Well, we're so grateful that you have joined us. And for people who haven't been here over the last 2 days, because there might be a few, Sarah's talking about what we're trying to do. So we want to open a holistic health village here. And as part of that, we want a facility that will help to treat children who are struggling to process what's happened over the last 2 years. And I think what's interesting here is it's not just the children who've worn the masks, it's the children whose families haven't wanted to wear the masks and have spoken out against. So we've essentially been split into 2 camps, and our children have had to decide with us whether they want to be in our camp or if they want to be in an opposite camp. And I think it's probably very difficult for the children who have parents like us who just have been saying, no, you don't need to listen to the government, your teacher, what they're saying about masks, about vaccinations, because we don't believe in this. And in fact, my daughter Rihanna is here, I think. Rihanna, would you unmute yourself and just say what it's like to be on the receiving end of that? I don't mind you being honest. It's fine. Where are you, Rihanna? Are you here still? Hang on, let me just see. Oh, there she is, but let me ask her to unmute. While I'm asking her to unmute, she may have nipped off somewhere. But also in families, the children in families, you often have a split. So one child makes the decision that they believe one parent who doesn't think the measures are necessary, and another child will, feel more aligned with the other parent. And how do families negotiate that?
That's just that. I mean, that's a whole nother dimension, isn't it? That luckily I didn't have to face. All my husband and my eldest son, and we were all totally in agreement with it all. So very, very, very difficult and a terrible situation to put a young person in, that they would have to sort of have to make those choices and be sort of split in that way. I mean, it's just, I mean, every which way you look at it, really, there wasn't an easy way for anybody, any child, was there, no matter what their parents' take on it was. But being in a family where there was a split like that would have been terribly, terribly difficult.
Yeah, I think we negotiated it in our family because my eldest daughter, who's at university, was obviously surrounded by more people who believed in the narrative than didn't. So she wore masks and followed guidance when she was with them, and asked me not to send her anything that might contradict the guidance. But at the same time, it did go in at a deep level that vaccination probably wasn't a good idea, even though her friends pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed her. And then we also talk about resilience in children. I mean, what does that really mean? Does it mean that the adults haven't noticed what the children are going through? Does it mean that the children are not able to express what they're going through? What does resilience actually mean?
Well, that's a really good question. I think, I think up until relatively recently, maybe the last sort of, like I say, 10, 20 years, people, children were looked at as being very resilient, and you can almost sort of do anything to them or around them and they would recover from it. I mean, I don't think it was actually that long ago that there was a belief that babies didn't feel pain and they were operated on without any pain relief. Honestly, I'm not joking. It is, I think it was the 1970s. So yeah, so I think children have just been looked at as being, they'll bounce back. We can sort of do anything to them and they'll be okay. They'll develop, but they'll be resilient and they'll recover. But I think, it is known these days that actually children are very vulnerable. They and this resilience comes from being in adverse environments, and then they adapt themselves. They become resilient to the adverse conditions in which they are in. So they're actually amazingly clever at that. I mean, if you think about a child who's in a domestic abuse situation, they will, their nervous system will become on high alert to keep themselves safe, so that they can get out of the way of any danger. Now, and so the nervous system will adapt itself to the environment in which it's living. And so you could maybe call that a type of resilience. But the difficulty is when they come out of that environment, it's very difficult to then change that adaptive process. And that's the problem, I think, that a lot of people are dealing with if they've been in very traumatic early situations and environments, and then they're having to deal with that, through anxiety and depression and alcoholism and drug taking and self-harm, because they're trying to deal with the way they've adapted themselves to survive. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think parents often don't recognize that children communicate through behavior rather than words.
Well, exactly.
So I suppose a red flag for any parent with a child sort of say under 25, if you notice changes in their behavior, please try and talk to them about it. It's often quite difficult to strike up conversations. I found it much easier if we were in the car, for example.
Absolutely, yeah.
Definitely outside the home seems to be much easier. Why that might be, I don't know. But
well, in the car, for example, you're not looking at each other, so you're both sort of facing forward, and it's less sort of invasive, really, isn't it, and a bit more relaxing. But you're absolutely right, Sally. I think that's another thing that's become much more well known over the last 10 or 20 years with all this trauma informed practice and training, is our children and young people. It's their behavior that shows how they are feeling, and often this behavior can be quite off-putting, and you want to keep away from them, and it's like that. But we need to get past that, and we need to look underneath that. It's looking underneath the behavior and being curious. What's going on? What is going on there? What's this behavior trying to tell me?
Yeah. We are out of time, Sarah, but
okay.
In the chat, somebody said they wanted you to know that you didn't need to worry about your presentation. It was really informative, and to thank you for that.
Oh.
We will still take our 15-minute break because we have a video that June Trammer very kindly made, 3 videos for us today. So we're going to play that and give everyone a comfort break. Zenobia, we don't really know what happened, but somehow she lost connection and didn't realize. So she's practiced her PowerPoint already this morning.
I had to deliver my whole speech to myself.
Well, we're really looking forward to hearing it
No, it's
now,
it's
Zenobia.
rubbish now. I'm so sorry, everyone. I really, I don't know what happened. I'm slightly anxious just to practice it. I don't know whether Sally and I, in the break, whether we can just check that it's linking without me cutting off, so we don't waste people's time.
Well, look, I'm going to let you do that with Kiara, if that's okay, because she's our tech expert.
Okay.
And we'll see everybody else at in 10 minutes.
Well,
10 minutes.
well done, Sarah.
Take a
Well
10-minute
done.
break.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Sarah.
That was fantastic. Thank you.